Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Madi Kay. This is my big chair. And today we are going to be talking about the 125 books I read in 2024. I know I'm very late with this video, but you know what I say, better late than never. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, in order to make this video even more interesting today, we are only going to be talking about these books in the most concise way possible. Meaning for each book, I'm only going to share with you a one-sentence summary and a one-sentence review. Without further ado, let's get started. If you're new here, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you get more videos like this. And don't forget to comment a book emoji down in the comments if you make it to the end of this video. And also let me know what books you read in 2024. We're going to start this video with my best books of 2024, meaning my 5-star reads of this year. Also, to give you guys an idea of why I rate certain books 5 stars, it's because 1, they educate me on something that I did not know before. 2, they bring out a lot of emotions in me, like they make me laugh, they make me cry, they make me feel things. And also, if it just transcends any other book I've read that year. And my favorite book of 2024 has got to be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And in this book, our heroine marries a widow and soon finds out upon moving in with him in his giant mansion that she is living in the shadow of his late wife, who was lost unceremoniously out at sea. In my personal opinion, this is the perfect gothic romance modern classic of our time that is both haunting and thrilling. All right, now on to the next book, which is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. A witch and a vampire team up to find a magical manuscript, which will help them find the origin story of their own species and how to avoid extinction. This book is basically Twilight for adults that combine magic and science together to bring this magical world to life. All right, and on to our next book. Notes on an Execution is about a serial killer who is living out his final hours on Earth before his execution. And we as a reader see his life through the lens of the women that most affected or were most affected by him. This book humanizes every single character, including the serial killer, and mourns the lost lives of his victims, as well as drawing striking parallels between nature versus nurture to see, are serial killers bred or born? Next up on our list, we have a book that I've been wanting to read for years, but just never got around to it for some reason, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. Narrated by Death, we follow Liesel as she is adopted by an elderly couple in Germany during World War II. This book is a profound study of human spirit and resilience and how a spark of rebellion can change lives forever. All right, and next up on our list, we have The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. The Age of Magical Overthinking is Amanda Montell's third nonfiction book that focuses on pop culture phenomena like standums, conspiracy theories, and astrology. This is a great exploration of the human's brain chemistry and psychology that affects how we think and how we interact with the world around us. All right, next up on our list, we have my first and only graphic novel in the 5-star category, and that is Watchmen by Alan Moore. So Watchmen, like I said, is a graphic novel about costumed heroes in an alternate universe that teeters on the edge of world wars amidst costume hero assassinations and growing political divide. This profound book is eons ahead of its time that takes a very poignant, dark, and gritty look at humanity and our need for self-preservation and lengths we'll go through just to avoid extinction on a mass scale. All right, veering into the children's classic genre, we have The Tales of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. This book is about a small mouse with big dreams who must rescue the princess from the dark confines of the prison below the castle. This book explores really interesting themes like light versus darkness and the ability to forgive for past transgressions. In my opinion, that book should be taught in every single school. All right, next up on my list is the only memoir in the 5-star category, and that is A Woman and Me by Britney Spears. In this book, Britney Spears tells a harrowing story of her promising rise from her humble beginnings to pop star superstardom to essentially becoming a prisoner in her own home thanks to her conservatorship under her parents. This book honestly made me cry in so many places, and it just really broke my heart for Britney and made me realize that this woman's life was basically stolen from her. This isn't part of the review, but I really hope that Britney does get the life that she deserves. Okay, so now that we're done with our 5-star reads, let's move on to my 4.5 to 4-star read. Now, 4-star reads are basically my 5-star reads, but they're missing that one thing that really just makes it go from good to great. And that could be anything from a conversation that really bugged me, distressing situations, to maybe there's just a character I really don't like. There's just something about it that just rubs me the wrong way, but I still like and would recommend to people. but it just was good, just not great. The first book we're going to talk about in my 4-star category is going to be the graphic novel series Scott Pilgrim vs. the World by Brian O'Malley. Now I'm combining the entire series together as one book because one, it took me like a half an hour to read through each of these, and also I see this as one conclusive storyline. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Scott Pilgrim wants to date Ramona Flowers, but he must fight and defeat her 7 evil exes. This is a heartfelt and satirical graphic novel series that is really fun. I highly recommend it. Next up on our list, we have Book Eaters by Suni Dean. This book is about Devon, who is willing to break the patriarchal rules of her high society book eater clan in order to save her son. This is a compelling story about family, freedom, and the lengths a mother will go to in order to protect her family. All right, next up on our list, we have Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, a memoir about the author's many adventures in her small little corner of London, England, and her search for meaning and, of course, love. This is a witty and insightful look into the dating lives of women and the harsh reality of dating that really reminded me a lot of Bridget Jones. All right, next up on our list, we have Call Me By Your Name by Andre Esselman. Call Me By Your Name is a love story between Oliver and Elio that begins when Oliver spends a summer in Italy with Elio's family as a graduate assistant to his father. Besides the concerning age gap, but this story is a prolific glance at love, gender, and sexual fluidity, and what it means to fully immerse yourself in a relationship so intimate to the point that you lose yourself. Next up on our list, we have The Measure by Nikki Erlich. In The Measure, one day, everyone above the age of 22 suddenly gets this mysterious box delivered to their door, and inside there is a string that essentially dictates the measure or the length of their lives. This book focuses on the theme of living your life to the fullest and on your terms even when faced with your own mortality, and how fear can really dictate the measure of our lives more than a string can. Next up, we have Sleep Tight by J.H. Markert, which is my first and I believe only horror book outside of Book Eaters that I rated 4 stars. Sleep Tight is a horror thriller book that follows the detective Tessa. She searches for her daughter who is kidnapped by a radicalized cult loyal to the notorious serial killer Father Silence. This book is a true nail-biter all the way through, and it also incorporated a lot of elements that I really enjoyed from my Criminal Minds watching days, which include multiple personality, serial killers, cults, the whole shebang. Next book in my 4-star rating list, we have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Malibu Rising is a historical fictional biopic about the fictional Mick Riva and his 4 children in a wild party that will change their lives forever. This book is full of drama, tragedy, and heartache, which makes it both a fun but a brutal read. Next up on our list, we have A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, in which a modest tea monk teams up with a robot to go on a soul-searching journey to find purpose in a seemingly purposeless life. This is a short but sweet novel about the human condition and explores every human being's desire to have meaning and what it's like to be human through the eyes of the robot. Next up, we have the sequel to Caraval, and that is Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This book follows Donatella, who must fulfill her side of the bargain to the mischievous fate Jax, who tasked her to find out the true identity of Legend, the supposed ruler of Caraval. This book is very reminiscent of Alice in Wonderland that transcends its predecessor in both storytelling and character arcs. Up next on our list, we have another mystery thriller, The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. This book follows Rachel, whose entire world is turned upside down when she witnesses what she believes to be a murder, but no one believes her. This is a gripping thriller that kept me hooked all the way through. And now we move into a bit of a surprise for me in 2024, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, the only romance book that I have in my 4-star ratings. Red, White, and Royal Blue follows the story of a turbulent love affair between the son of the U.S. president and the Prince of England. This book was full of adorable moments, wacky hijinks, and fun quips and wit that really made this my favorite romance book of the year. I also recommend watching the movie, by the way. Next up is another dark horse of a book for me, and that is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, the only self-help book in my 4-star ratings. So this is a very interesting self-help book because its minimalistic nature really calls to question the overconsumption and overconsumerism that has thrived in American culture. This book really got me in the deep cleaning mood, and now I'm motivated more than ever to just tear my house apart. You know, when I said that Red, White, and Royal Blue was the only book on my 4-star ratings list, I forgot I have The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon, which is a story about a girl named Natasha who is about to move back to Jamaica because her families getting deported, who meets Daniel, who tries to make her last day in America one to remember for her lifetime. This book made me laugh, made me cry, made me learn new things about niche culture that I just never knew before. And it also made me really hate the immigration system that we have here in America. If you are an aspiring author, I definitely recommend reading this book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. This book has the one blueprint that all authors must follow in order to make their story just as great and memorable as other books before it. This book really dives into themes like the hero's journey, character arc, setting, world building, and plot. Just everything you need to know about writing, you could definitely find in this book. Last book on my 4-star ratings list, we have Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. Now, this book is about Asa and her BFF who become little detectives when the billionaire in their town mysteriously goes missing. This YA book was very reminiscent of Sally Rooney in the way that John Green really delves into Asa's OCD and really explores what her mind is like, especially in this very crippling mental health state. Now that we're done with our 4-star books, let's move on to the next category, which is my 3 to 3.5 star reads. Now, what makes a book a 3-star read for me? This category is essentially books that I just have neutral feelings about. These just weren't exactly winners for me, but I didn't hate them. They just didn't wow me. I just felt about it. That's the best way I can describe it. First off, on our 3.5 to 3-star rating list, we have End of Story by AJ Finn. Now, this is a story about a superfan who's invited to her favorite author's house. May, in fact, be the key to solve a cold murder case that has plagued the author's family for years. I really like the plot twist at the end of the book, and I feel like the author did a really good job of building up to that. And overall, I thought that this was a really fun murder mystery thriller to read. Next up on our 3-star list, we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This book is about a struggling author who steals her best friend's manuscript and publishes it under her own name. This book delves into the very precarious topic of racism and whitewashing when it comes to the publishing industry. Next up, we have Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Now, this book is about an elite socialite named Noemi who travels to her cousin's house to see if her distressing letters are actually true and uncovers a very dark family legacy there. I definitely like the theme of the haunted house and the ghosts of the past haunting the people who still live there, but I will say there are some trigger warnings for body horror. Please keep that in mind if you're wanting to pick this up. All right, next up on our list, we have Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mendel. Oh, I got that name on the first try. Nice. This book follows 3 different people through 3 different centuries, past, present, and future, who are all connected by a mysterious anomaly through space and time. While I did really like this generational take on time travel and the fact that all of these characters are linked by this mysterious, cryptic time anomaly, this book really does have its favorites when it comes to certain characters, and I feel like we didn't get closure with some of them that I was really hoping for. Next up on our list, we have Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar. Jill Duggar is from the 19 and Counting Duggar clan, and she recalls what it was like to be on TV constantly. It's a way that her parents essentially exploited her and her siblings for clout, and the abuse she suffered at the hands of her brother, and also her way of healing, moving on, and becoming her own person outside of her religion. Wow, that was a long sentence. I'm sorry, but it had to be said. So I feel like this book did a great job of exploring the toll it takes on the family when you feel the need to constantly post yourselves online or put your kids up on television. But I am slightly confused as to why she is a little more upset at the journalist who exposed her brother's abuse, as opposed to her parents who consistently try to cover up their son's very disturbing tendencies. Next up on our list, we have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Moyer. Now, this book follows Gideon, a swordsman, or swordswoman, I should say, who is tasked with helping the princess get through a deadly trial to impress the emperor and become a powerful mortal being. But along the way, they learn that there is evil afoot in the trial, and many contestants are dropping dead. Even though I really appreciated the comedy and the main character, Gideon the Ninth, I did not like the lore around necromancy. I just found it to be way too gory and graphic for my liking. Anyway, next up on our list, we have Legendborn by Tracy Dion. It's a book about Bree, whose entire life is changed forever when she discovers a secret society that are essentially direct descendants from King Arthur and the Knights at the Round Table. I like the exploration of secret societies and all the folklore surrounding King Arthur and the Knights at the Round Table, but it just wasn't my favorite read of the year, and I just felt like I just wasn't really motivated to finish it. All right, next up on our list, we have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novak. Now, this book follows Elle, who studies magic at a very prestigious, very deadly school where the students could be killed at any time by the monsters who live there, apparently. My biggest gripe with this book is I'm just not a big fan of the dark academia, deadly college trope because it doesn't make any sense why any parents would send their kids to schools if there was a possibility that they would die. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand it. Next up, we have The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. Now, this book follows Lale, who is a Jewish man taken to Auschwitz, and that is when he meets his future wife, where they fight to stay alive amidst the worst genocide of human history. Even though I really did the romance of this book, it was a very nice message about love and how that conquers all. Here was one point in the book that really took me out, that really bugged me, was when the male main character described his future wife as a woman who doesn't know how pretty she is. She's not like other girls vibes, and I just didn't really care for it. Next up, we actually have one of my book club reads of 2024, and that is The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. This book follows the opening weekend of a new posh hotel called The Manor that is ripe with local cults, skeletons in the closet, and deadly secrets. Hi everybody, this is Editing Maddie here, realizing that I didn't actually give you a review of Midnight Feast. So even though I like this book just fine, it was a decent enough mystery thriller. I've just read her other books, The Paris Apartment and The Guest List, and I just found those to be better books in my opinion. Alright, so next up we have The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This is essentially Jane Eyre fanfiction, and it follows the character Jane as she marries a rich widower who has skeletons in his closet. Even though I liked this book just fine, it just felt like the same iteration of every other mystery thriller book I've read, and it just didn't really add anything original, and it just felt stale. Next up on our list, we have Queen Charlotte by Shonda Rhimes and Julia Quinn. This book follows the titular Queen Charlotte in her tumultuous relationship with King George as he descends into madness. This is a very jarring look at the atrocious way we used to treat mental health patients, and even though I really appreciated the gravitas and the respect that Shonda Rhimes and Julia Quinn gave to this source material, it was just a lot, and it does make for a very difficult read. Okay, we're going to go quickly because the lighting is starting to change here. Apparently now that it's snowing, it's basically nighttime outside. Next up on our list is probably one of the most famous chick lit books out there, and that is The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisberger. So this is an insightful look into the prestigious and very fast-paced world of New York and the fashion industry and how it just really tears apart at your work-life balance through the eyes of the main character, Andy. Her main character of Andy is just really insufferable, and she just tries so hard to be more morally righteous than the other people like Miranda and her coworkers. For example, she begrudgingly gives this homeless man some money and she doesn't really want to do it, but she just does it to make herself feel like a good person. And I don't know, that's not a character I can really root for. Next up on our list, we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Mosfeg. So this book follows the story of a woman who decides to use medication to force herself into a year-long slumber. And at the end of this very interesting personal experiment, she'll hopefully wake up reinvigorated with a new sense of life and meaning. I really did feel for this girl on a spiritual level. There are many times, especially with all the craziness that came out of 2024 where I just feel the need to just like crawl into a hole and not come out for a while. I feel like there are a lot more productive ways to find meaning in life, especially for those of us who are not privileged enough to be able to afford to not work for a year. All right, next up on our list, we have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book follows the titular boy, Hamnet, whose family is suffering from the plague and whose father is a famous playwright who essentially abandons his family during their time of need. The father of this book was just so frustrating and insufferable that it just really put a bad taste in my mouth and put me in a bad mood throughout this entire book. Next up on our list, we're actually going to be talking about a duology, 2 books at the same time. Let's see if I can hold them up. At the same time, it's a struggle. Okay, there we go. I got it. As you can see, we have Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I'm just going to put them down for now. So this duology is an enemies to lovers romance in a World War I-inspired London that is being torn apart by a war between 2 gods. Even though I did appreciate Rebecca Ross's writing style and I really loved the lore surrounding the magical typewriters, I just felt like these 2 books were essentially the same, like they had a very similar plot and it just got boring. And now we're going to talk about probably my heftiest read of 2024, and that's this guy. It's The Walking Dead Compendium 2 by, there's a lot of them. We have Robert Kirkman, Charlie Adlard, and Cliff Rathburn. I'm not going to hold this because it's super heavy, but I'm counting this as a book because look at that. That's insane. So this is the second compendium volume in the Walking Dead series, and I definitely have to say it's my favorite one so far. It follows the story of Rick Grimes and his friends and family who are trying to survive in a zombie apocalypse, but this one was definitely a lot more tame. It was just not as graphic, ironically, as the first one. Next up on our list, we have a nonfiction entry here, Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That the Movement Forgot by Mickey Kendall. And this book is an insightful look at the many issues that Black women or women of color face in this country, especially when it comes to feminism and the issue of intersectionality in feminism as well. Now, the reason why I didn't rate this book any higher was not because of the material itself, but the title is very misleading. I thought it was going to be a book about multiple women and their experiences, but it was really just the author's experiences. But otherwise, I feel like this book was really educational and a really important read for a lot of people. All right, next up on our list, we have The Fury by Alex. And this book is about the narrator, a man with a tragic past, with plenty to hide, who is secretly in love with his girl best friend and goes with her to a secret island where a tragedy is about to take place. And I don't know, the only thing I can really say about this book is that it just wasn't as good as A Silent Patient. So next up on our list, after reading The Tales of Despero, I decided to read Kate DiCamillo's other book, which is called The Miraculous Adventures of Edward Tulane. And this book is about a small porcelain bunny who is separated from his owner and the adventures that he goes on to try to reconnect with her. This book was definitely a very emotional one, and I think it was a little more sad than I was anticipating. And it just wasn't as much of a fun read as Tales of Despero. Next up on our list, we have Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. And this book is about the titular man, Dexter, who is secretly a serial killer and tries to have a normal life. So this book essentially is season 1 of Dexter, and it's between him and the ice truck killer. And I just feel like the show did a lot better job with that story than the book did. Next up on our list, we have another graphic novel, which is Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This graphic novel is about a young girl who grew up in a newly radicalized Iran that threatens to destroy her family and take away the freedoms that they hold so dear. I think books like this are very important to know that a lot of people don't really like how the Taliban has taken over the Middle East, and there are a lot of people who disagree with their dogma and their religion, and it makes me really sad because they're in a very difficult situation that they just can't get out of. And continuing on that very sad note, we have Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, a book about the World's Fair in Chicago that is essentially a breeding ground for a serial killer picking off single women that go to the fair. Now, fun fact about this book, I think I started reading it about 10 years ago and I didn't finish it until now. It's got to a point where it's very dry, where it was focusing a lot on the World's Fair, and I just didn't really care about that. I just wanted to learn about the serial killer, and I didn't really care about other things like the voting or how long it took for them to build the World's Fair. Wow, that review is definitely longer than a sentence. I'm sorry. Next up, we have a book by one of my favorite comedians, and that is Eliza Schlesinger's All Things Considered. Now, in this book, Eliza covers everything from motherhood, her marriage, all the expectations put on new mothers, as well as a lot of harrowing things like her stalker and her miscarriage, which I just learned about by reading this book. And even though I did really enjoy this book, it just felt like a 6-hour long sketch, which in hindsight is not a bad thing. It just gets tiring after a certain point. Next up, we have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So The Poet X is a book about Zia Mora, who is a teenage girl who is really struggling with her blossoming sexuality and her desire to go out in the world and make something for herself and her art as a poet, even though her religious mother wants her to be someone very different. I think I just got so upset and triggered by the mom and to see religious trauma that she inflicted on poor Zia Mora, who's just trying to be her own person. And I feel like they just really brushed a lot of her abuse under the rug way too quickly, all for the sake of closure. Next up, we have another graphic novel read, and that is Sandcastle by Frederick Peters and Pierre Oscar Levy. Now, this is a graphic novel that M. Night Shyamalan's movie Old is based off of, and it's following this group of people who are stuck on this island that is aging them exponentially faster than normal, and in their fight for escape and survival. And not to be prudish, but the amount of nudity in this graphic novel was just shocking and a little bit more than I cared for. But otherwise, I still found it to be a really interesting premise, and I still enjoyed it. Next up, we have Knights of Rodanthe by Nicholas Sparks, a book about two middle-aged divorcees who fall in love in the course of a week during their vacation in Rodanthe. I definitely like this book because I feel like we don't get a lot of middle-aged romance in the rom-com genre, and it felt like a breath of fresh air for me. And it was a very quick and enjoyable read. Okay, now that we made it through my biggest category of this video, let's move on to my 2.5 to 2-star rated books. Now, what qualifies a book to be a 2-star rating for me is very similar to what makes a 3-star book for me, and it's when the bad parts just really outweigh the good, and it's either really boring or forgettable, or there's just a lot of problematic themes or content warnings that I just feel like were blown out of proportion, or just insufferable characters that I just could not root for. And first up on this list, we have Anxious People by Frederick Backman. At an open house, this book is about a group of potential buyers at an open house for an apartment that are being held hostage by a gunman in the middle of a robbery. I like the fact that this book took a lot of the characters' different point of view, so that way we could really see the world through their eyes. But I feel like the author really tried to intentionally mislead the reader in a lot of ways just so he could have a plot twist at the end, and it just didn't wow me. Compared to A Man Called Ove, it definitely was not his best work. Next up on our list, we have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, a book about a mother who witnesses her son murdering someone, and then every day since she realizes that she's waking up in the past, and she's going further and further in the past to find out why her son ended up murdering this man in the first place. Now, while I was essentially intrigued by this book and I really enjoyed it, I just didn't like the main character's thought process that as the mother, it was her fault that her son turned out this way because she was working all the time without really giving any accountability to her, who is also responsible for raising their son. Next up, we have Eris by Rachel Hawkins. Thriller following Cam and Jules, who go to Cam's grandmother's house after she dies in order to read her will, only to discover there is more money waiting for them, as well as a secret from her past that threatens to uproot his entire family. This book just felt like a lackluster reiteration of Knives Out, and it just felt too derivative for me to enjoy it as its own book. Next up on our list, we have Reckless Girls, also by Rachel Hawkins. I read a lot of her books this year. So this book is about a couple who agrees to take these 2 girls on a boat trip to a mysterious island where nothing there is as it seems and everyone there has secrets. I do a Lord of the Flies-esque atmosphere in this book, but the main character just made a lot of mistakes and choices that just made her out to be a bit of a doormat and a hypocrite. That's made it really hard for me to root for her in the end. Next up, can you guess who this book is going to be by? The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. Full disclosure, I did read these books mostly because the covers were cute. So The Villa is following these 2 best friends who embark on a trip to go to this amazing villa in Italy where a celebrity was killed and there are secrets in a diary hidden in the walls, and they try to uncover the mystery of what happened that night. I feel like Rachel Hawkins' books really take a turn for the worse at the end of all of her books, and at the end of this one, the character just made a choice that to me was just the dumbest choice you could ever make in that situation. Next up, we have If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. Nolan. We're going with Nolan. So this is about Autumn and her ex-best friend who dies tragically in a car crash, and her reflection on the past 4 years of their life and where the relationship went wrong and all the secret feelings they harbored for each other. I did enjoy this book up until the halfway point when there were a lot of very problematic themes surrounding teenage pregnancy, and it just made me want to scream at the parents and be like, why are you not teaching your child proper sex education? What's going on here? Next up on our list, we have The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants by Laura Ann Bracheris. I hope I said that correctly. The hardest part about these reviews for me is not just the reading, it's just pronouncing everyone's names correctly, honestly. So for those of you who are not aware, A Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants is a story about these 4 girls who, for the first time in all their life as BFFs, they have to spend the summer apart, and they use these magical pants to keep them connected and to write letters to each other and all their adventures while wearing the pants. Now, this book is written in the early 2000s, and oh by golly does it show it. There's so much fat phobia in here and a lot of very predatory behavior that would really raise some eyebrows nowadays. Next up on our list, we have The Perfect Couple by Ellen Hilderbrand. Now, this book is about a wedding gone wrong. The maid of honor is found dead and the entire wedding party is under scrutiny. Now, I really liked this book up until the very anticlimactic ending, and I felt really bummed because I feel like I got no real closure from it. Next up on our list, we have The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This book is heavily based off of the Gilmore Girls show and the relationship between Lorelai and Luke. This book definitely leans heavy into the Gilmore Girls fanfiction, and it's mostly based off of vibes and not any real story, which is good if you're into that, but for me, I just see something else. Next up, we have the second book in the Dream Harbor series, which is A Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. This book takes place in the same town of Dream Harbor and follows Hazel, who owns a bookstore, and Noah, who go on a scavenger hunt following clues that are left in Hazel's books and end up finding love instead. I just didn't find it as much of a cozy read, mostly because it took place in summer instead of fall. Next up on our list, we have The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, a story about two sisters who fight for survival in their own ways during World War II. Now, this author definitely had favorites amongst the two sisters, and it felt like she really favored the one sister who was the loudest and the most outwardly rebellious, as opposed to the quiet sister who was softer and was able to win her own war in a way that a lot of people don't really see as heroic, which is unfortunate in my opinion. Next up on our list, we have Tom Lake by Anne Pratt. This book is essentially Bridges of Madison County, and it follows the main character as she recounts her tumultuous love affair with a famous actor to her kids. Now, my main grievance with this book is it's a weird conversation to have with your kids in front of your now husband about your ex or your past dating life. Always just came across as cringy to me, which is another reason why I also don't like the How I Met Your Mother series. All right, up next, we have None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, a book about Alex, who is a famous podcaster who runs into her birthday twin, Josie, a woman with a perplexing story, and interviews her for a podcast, only to question whether or not Josie is actually telling the truth. This was another forgettable story with a frustrating plot twist at the end that, again, just felt like the rug was being pulled out from under me by the author, and I just did not appreciate it. So before we get into the next book, I just want to get into a little bit of a context of a personal project that I've been doing the past couple years, where I go and I read books that I missed out on in my childhood or in my youth that I either wasn't allowed to read or I just didn't get around to reading. And one of those goals I had for myself was reading the Twilight series. So color me surprised when I actually found a Twilight book that I didn't actually hate, and that was Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Meyer. So for those of you who are not aware of what Twilight is, Twilight essentially follows the love story between a human Bella and the vampire Edward, and this is a final book in the series in which Bella finally turns into a vampire, but not before they have a baby, Renesmee. I like this book a lot more than the others because it actually delved into what it's like to be a newly transitioned vampire. But regardless of that, I still hate Edward. He ruined this entire series for me, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. Also, a huge surprise to me was the fact that Life and Death by Stephanie Meyer also received a bit of a higher rating than the rest of the series, because this is a gender-swapped version of Twilight in which Edward is a girl and Bella is a boy. And compared to the other book, I like the femme fatale aspect a lot more than the others, because in the Twilight series, Edward just comes across as abusive, whereas his female counterpart comes across as a badass. Next up, we have A Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and this book follows Alexis, who is a big town surgeon who one day has a car crash outside of town and meet Daniel, who turns her entire world upside down. And even though I found the main love interest to be rather enjoyable, I hated the family, I hated the ex, and I hated the will they won't they aspect of this book, because let's be real here, we all know how this book is going to end. Why waste my time? Next up on our list, we have Finale, the final book in the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber. The two sisters, Scarlett and Tella, must find a way to save the world after the Fates are released from the House of Cards. After reading Legendary, this book just fell so flat for me, and I felt like it was an overly convoluted conclusion to an otherwise really enjoyable series. Next up, we have Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This is a book about Lillian, a down and out in her luck woman who is asked to nanny for two children who, when they get angry, bursts into flame. Yes, you heard that correctly. Nightmare of a situation, that is. I really hated Lillian's friend Madison, ironically, because she just treats Lillian like absolute crap, and she never gets her comeuppance. There is no justice for Lillian in this entire book. She just lets Madison walk all over her, and Madison never apologizes. Next up, we have probably one of my most disappointing books of the year, and that is Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. This is another Hercule Poirot book in which he needs to solve a murder that happened on All Hallows Eve. Now, the victim of murder here is a young teenage girl who is insufferable. Let's be real here. No one is upset that she's gone, and Hercule Poirot kept asking if she was sexually assaulted throughout the entire case to an unsettling degree, and it was just jarring the amount of times he asked this question. Next up, we have The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. So this is another Knives Out mystery thriller following a fake psychic named Hal, who was sent a letter by mistake claiming that she needs to come and collect her inheritance from a woman she is not at all related to, and has to prove to the family that she is worthy of this inheritance. Even though this was not the worst Ruth Ware book I've read this year, it definitely just fell flat for me. I felt like I was reading the same book over and over again. Okay, next up we have The Husbands by Holly And this book is about Lauren, who finds that she is married to a man she does not even know, and every time her husband goes up in the attic, he is replaced by a new one. And even though I liked this book in the very beginning, the constant cycle of husbands really bored me after a while, and I was just completely done with the book and wanted it to end. Next up, we have Love and Gelato by Jenna Evans Welch. This is about a girl named Lena, who after her mother's passing is sent to Italy to spend the summer with her father. This book just had a cheating trope that really took me out of the novel and just made the characters so insufferable and problematic to me that I just could not root for them in the end. Another book I thought I had a physical copy of but don't, Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This book is about a girl named Mara who's on a quest to rescue her sister from her abusive husband by hiring the likes of a fairy godmother, a demon-possessed chicken, a knight, and a grave witch. I really like the characters because they were really cute and quirky, but overall the story itself is pretty forgettable. Up next, we have another mystery thriller, A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. And this book follows Chloe Davis, the daughter of a notorious serial killer who one day starts noticing a pattern of young girls dying around her and realizes that the killings are happening again. This book was forgettable, just like the other book, to the point where I forgot that I actually read it, and I kept it on my TBR list for months. All right, up next, we have Looking for Alaska by John Green. This book is about a boy named Miles who goes to a boarding school and falls for a girl named Alaska. This is just another manic pixie dream girl book that John Green has shoved out into the public, and honestly, this trope is getting tired and old at this point. All right, guys, editing Maddie here again, realizing I forgot to include another book on our 2-star list, and that is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. And this book follows Margaret, the titular character, as she moves with her family to New Jersey and her journey with finding new friends, trying to fit in, and just the general expectations around being a preteen at this time. And this book was a huge disappointment for me because I really went into this book wanting to like it, but I was hit with all these unexpected curveballs, and then the book concluded without any real closure, and I was bummed that there wasn't a sequel. Up next, we have Two Can Play by Ali Hazelwood, a book following Viola, who is a video game creator/writer who is tasked with working with her rival on the next Limerence game. I'm not much of a gamer myself. I was really looking forward to learning more about the craft of video writing and video game creating, and I got absolutely none of that because this author was only focused on the romance between these two characters. All right, that concludes my 2-star rated books for this year. Let's move on to my 1.5 to 1-star rated books. A 1-star read for me basically means that an author either dealt with problematic issues in a way that came across as dismissive or concerning, gratuitous sex scenes or cursing, bad world building, poor storytelling, graphic scenes of violence against women, or abusive situations romanticized as a happily ever after. These things I just do not stand for, and it really takes me out of the book and just really makes it difficult for me to not only enjoy it, but to also finish it. Now let's get into the books that really disappointed me this year. Next up on our list, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. This story is about Daphne, whose fiancé unceremoniously breaks up with her and her journey to finding love again in places where she never thought she would find it. Now, even though I really liked the premise of this book in the very beginning, I found some of the names to be distracting. There's a character in here called Starfire. I'm not even kidding you. Yes, like the Teen Titan character. Hopefully her next book will be better. Next up on our list, we have Funny Feelings by Tara DeWitt. This book is about Farley, who strikes up a relationship with her manager. The main character of this book was extremely childish. She threw fits over nothing. And then at the end of the day, even though she's in the wrong, the guy had to apologize at the end of it. Next, we have Summer Broken Rules by K.L. Walther. So this story is about Meredith and her family who are traveling for her cousin's wedding, and during a family game of assassin, Meredith realizes that her target is a cute groomsman. Now, while I enjoyed the idea of an assassin game, I just could not imagine having my entire family and bridal party play a fun game without me while I had to stress over my wedding. Absolutely not. Up next, we have Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This book is about Elsie, a struggling theoretical physicist who acts as an escort to pay the bills and comes to find out one day that one of her client's brothers is actually her arch nemesis. Without giving too much away, let's just say that the main love interest did something so heinous and so damaging to not just the main character, but also to other people in her field, to the point where this guy is completely irredeemable in my eyes. And if I were Elsie, I would not even consider dating him at all. Up next, we have Honeymoon Crashers by Christina Lauren, the kind of sequel to The Unhoneymooners. And this book follows Amy, who tries to plan the perfect wedding for her sister in Hawaii and finds love along the way. Let's just say one of my least favorite characters from the first book was in this, and the entire time I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm sorry, why is this character still here? Next up, we have Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica. This book is about Nina, whose husband goes, and her friend Lily may have something to do with it. This book is perfect for you if you like to read about the dumbest people alive. Next up, we have The Longest Ride by Nicholas Sparks. This is a love story between Luke and Sophia, who spark up a romance after meeting at a rodeo, and an old man named Ira who's involved in their life somehow. If I'm being perfectly honest, the old man Ira's character had almost no impact at all, to the point where he could have been removed and would have saved us at least 200 pages. Next up, we have Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This book is about a young assassin named Selena who must fight to the death for a king that she hates in order to become his champion, only for strange deaths to begin popping up around the trials. Like many of the characters on my 1-star list, the author wants to try to convince us that this is the smartest, most capable, most badass assassin of them all, and yet she completely is oblivious to the very obvious villain of this book. Next up, we have the worst self-help book I read this year, and that is How to Keep House by Drowning by Casey Davis. This is another self-help book I read that covers mental health, especially when it comes to the pandemic and just the arduous burden of being a mom and being a person just trying to survive in this world. I hate it when self-help books tell you that if you can't solve your problems by yourself, that you should hire someone to help you. Not all of us can afford that. It's unrealistic. Next up, we have probably one of the worst John Green books I've ever read, and that is Paper Towns. This book is about Quentin, who is on a quest to find his crush Margot after she disappears out of the blue just a few weeks before graduation. Now again, I cannot stand the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope anymore, but I also really hated this entire pages-long conversation about balls that these teenage boys were talking about, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So this was another book club read for me this year, and that was A Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. This book is about Lo, a travel journalist on a fancy yacht who must solve a mysterious murder case of a woman that no one on the boat can remember. Lo was completely insufferable, borderline racist at many points, very inept at her job, and was just a hard character to root for. Next up, we have a very disappointing read for me this year, and that was Everything by Nicola Yoon. So this book is about a girl named Maddie who has a very severe immune disorder that prevents her from going outside, and her struggle to find meaning in life after she falls in love with the boy next door. Just to warn you, there will be a spoiler ahead, so go ahead and skip if you don't want to hear it. This one from being a knockoff Fault in Our Stars book to basically being a Gypsy Rose fan fiction. Up next, we have Mother-Daughter Murder Night by Nina Simon. Lana must find help for her granddaughter, who is accused of a murder that she did not commit. This Gilmore Girl fan fiction murder mystery really failed for me because it focused way too much on the grandmother and solving the murder. Next up, we have Lightlark by Alex Astor. This is a book about Isla, who is a wildling princess with no power, who must compete in a centennial tournament to restore power and balance to her people. The world building was just all over the place, the names were just lazy, and the ending just seemed way too predictable. Next up, I'm actually going to be covering 3 stories at once, and that is because they are novellas in this book, Loath to Love You by Ali Hazelwood. Now, these 3 novellas follow 3 best friends who are all in some STEM-related field, who all find love with their rivals or their enemies, so to speak. Now, my main qualm with these books is that it's getting to a point where I'm realizing that Ali Hazelwood is just writing the same book over and over with absolutely nothing to add to the enemies to lovers trope at all. The next book is A Christmas Tree Farm by Lori Gilmore, a book that follows Kira North, who inherits this Christmas tree farm and she tries to revitalize it for the town, all in the spirit of Christmas. The reason I didn't really like this book that much was because Kira, the main character, was essentially just a giant Scrooge, and it really just sucked all the fun out of Christmas-related books for me. So before I get into this next book, I do want to say another passion project of mine this year was to read and finish the original Bridgerton books in order to prepare for the TV series. And I do have to warn you ahead of time if you're thinking of doing that. These books are drastically different than the show, and you may not find them as enjoyable. And the first one that I'd like to talk about on this list that I read this year was When He Was Wicked by Julia Quinn. Now, this book follows Francesca's love story after her husband John mysteriously dies from an unknown ailment and her journey to find love again in order to have children. Even though this book was original in the way that it captured the topic of infertility infertility. There were just so many red flags and abusive tendencies that were just brushed under the rug in this book that it just made my jaw drop, and it made this book so insufferable. It felt like pulling teeth trying to finish it. You may notice a pattern with these next books coming up, but here we have To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. This one follows Eloise's love story and her falling for Sir Philip through letters and growing to love him and his family that she did not know that he had. And the reason I did not like this book was because it deals with suicidal ideation in the worst way possible, and Philip is the biggest walking red flag I've ever seen, because this man literally confessed multiple times that he was trying to trap Eloise so she could be like his wet nurse and nanny to take care of his kids because he couldn't be bothered to actually be a parent. But does that sound like romance to you? Next up on our list, we have In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle, which is a book about Danny. Wakes up one day 5 years in the future to realize that she is actually married to her best friend's fiance. This book fell into the cheating trope trap that I hate, when authors give main characters way more levity to cheat because they're the main character. Next up on our list, we have Thank You for Listening by Julie Whelan, a book about an audiobook narrator who agrees to be part of a reading for a romance book and falls for her co-narrator. Now, Sawani is a severely traumatized woman, and I do not want to dismiss that at all, but I do not like the way that she makes her problems everyone's problems and seems like she's always picking for a fight or a conflict just to prove that she's right, when in reality, she should really work this out through therapy. Up next, we have another disappointing read for me, and that was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. So this book follows August, who meets Jane on the subway and finds out that she's actually from the 70s and has been stuck in this weird time loop ever since. So this book just branched off into one too many directions. Many of them were just way too problematic for me, especially since they also delved into the weird cheating trope, and I just felt so bad for Jane when all was said and done. She was a true victim of this story. Up next, we have The Lincoln Highway by Moore Tolles, which is about Emmett and his brother who strike out on this road trip to go to Nebraska but end up in New York instead. This book was basically trying to be Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And it failed epically. Plus, the side character Duchess was so insufferable, he made this reading experience intolerable for me. Up next, we have The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, a novella about the vampire Bree Tanner who dies in eclipse. This book was basically an empty cash grab that did absolutely nothing to further the Twilight series or gain any more insight into the lives of these vampires. Next up, we have The Bodyguard by Catherine Center, a book about a female bodyguard who has to protect her client but falls for him instead. Once again, the main character, who we're supposed to be rooting for, is probably one of the dumbest people alive, and I'm not entirely convinced that she's ever been outside before. Next up on our list, we have Always Be My Duchess by Amali Howard, and this book is essentially Pretty Woman meets Bridgerton, between a duke who does not want to get married and Genevieve, an aspiring dancer who needs one leg up in life. There were just too many historical anachronisms for me, a bunch of modern dialogue. This book just relied way too much on its smut scenes. Next up, we have The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley, a book about a group of friends who decide to reunite every so often to give each other a living funeral so that way they always know how cherished and loved they are. Despite this amazing premise, some of these characters do some really reprehensible and deplorable things, not only to each other but to themselves, and just dismiss it as, oh, it's not a big deal. They're just going through a bad time in their life. All right, next up we have You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero, another self-help book written by a person who, quite frankly, has absolutely no substantial advice to give that would actually help anyone at all outside of their own privileged situation. There's really nothing that I can say to summarize this book because it's just a bunch of terrible life advice that I don't even want to repeat in case I sway you to the dark side. Okay, next up, we have probably one of the most problematic Bridgerton books in the entire series, and that is On the Way to the Wedding by Julia Quinn. This is about Gregory's love story, and in this book, Gregory is pining after Hermione, only for him to realize he's actually in love with her best friend Lucy. And this book feels like a telenovela, and it's so dramatic and so crazy, and Gregory does some horrible things to Lucy, and I reached my breaking point. I can't anymore with the series. I've completely sworn off of these books, and I don't think I'll ever pick up a Julia Quinn book ever again. And on that very positive train of thought, we have, in my opinion, the worst Nicholas Sparks book ever. This book follows Maggie Dawes, a woman who is dying of cancer who reflects on one of the most important Christmases of her life. What I thought was going to be a very touching, very sweet Christmas story story turned into a very questionable and concerning story about teenage pregnancy. Next up on our list, we have another Ali Hazelwood entry into the 1-star category, and that is Bride. This book follows Misery Lark, who is a vampire promised to werewolf in a marriage of convenience, but only marries him to really discover the mystery of her best friend's disappearance. This book just really failed in the realm of world building, and the nodding scene is why I rated this 1 star. Next up on our list, we have Take a Hint, Danny Brown, written by Talia Hibbert. Now, this book is about the titular Danny Brown and her fake dating relationship with the security guard at her school after a video of them together goes viral on the internet. Half of this book is basically just smut scenes, and the other half is the two characters being so horny for each other, it's honestly disturbing. Next up, we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, a book about a competitive ice skater named Anastasia who falls for the captain of the hockey team, Nate. This book excuses so many gross behaviors from men, not just from Nate, but also from her ice skating partner, Alex, and it just really makes me concerned for Anastasia overall. Next up we have It's in His Kiss by Julia Quinn, and this book covers Hyacinth's love story between her and Lady Danbury's grandson, Gareth. I didn't like this book because it was another man trying to trap a woman into marriage. Next up we have a book that nearly put me into a reading slump for the rest of the year, and that book is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. So this was basically the 3rd time Stephenie Meyer wrote Twilight, just in a slightly different way, and I have to say it was the worst one because it was basically 700 pages of Edward whining, and I don't think I've ever hated a character more than I do this one. This was the one Twilight book that I DNF'd that I thought I would not be able to get through and not be able to finish the series, and that one was Eclipse. This is a 3rd installment in the Twilight series. The Cullens and Bella and the werewolves prepare to fight Victoria, who's trying to create an army to revenge kill Bella. Jacob was just the biggest walking red flag, and he was the reason why I almost did not finish reading this series. Next up, we have another big one, and it's The Walking Dead Compendium 1. My arm is shaking just holding... Look at that. It's insane. So Walking Dead, like I mentioned before with the 2nd compendium, it's about Rick Grimes and his family and friends trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse. So this book had so much nudity, suicide, violence against women. It put me in a bad mood for days. I promise this will be the last time you see me, but I forgot to mention my 2nd least favorite book of 2024, and that was A Good Marriage by Stephen King. This book is about Darcy, a woman who is home alone as her husband is out on a business trip, and she finds this secret chest in the garage that actually points to him to being this notorious serial killer. And while I really was intrigued by this premise in the very beginning, I just felt like Stephen King went way too much into the gore and discussing details of what this man did to these women. I just did not need to know, personally. All right, guys, we made it to the final book of 2024. The worst one, in my opinion, and that is His and Hers by Alice Feeney. His and Hers follows a reporter named Anna who's reporting on an old friend's death in her hometown, only to discover that there is way more to this murder than she initially thought. This book made me physically ill with the graphic scenes of violence against women that it made me never want to touch another Alice Feeney book ever again. Okay, you guys, we made it to the end of this video. Oh my gosh, thank you for your patience. I'm so sorry again for the weird lighting, the noise in the background. But for those of you who did make it to the end, you are my favorite. You're the best. Make sure to leave a book emoji in the comments. Let me know what books you read this year. Were there any books on my list that you were surprised or they fell on the ratings list? And also let me know what other videos you guys would like to see. I'm always open to suggestions. And of course, have a great day and keep reading. Hopefully this year, 2025, will be a better reading year for me. Let's hope so.